I didn't say a word when my daughter-in-law told me I was taking up too much space in this house. I just looked at her. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, hair pulled back tight the way she always wore it when she was about to say something she'd been rehearsing. My son was right behind her, hands in his pockets, eyes aimed at the floor. I nodded once. Then I walked back to my room and closed the door quietly behind me. That was a Thursday evening in October. 3 months before that, I had sold the house I'd lived in for 22 years. My wife, Beverly, passed away 14 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. The kind that moves fast and gives you just enough time to say goodbye, but not enough time to actually be ready. We had 40 years together, she and I. I taught high school history for 31 of those years, and she ran the front desk at a dental office for most of them. We weren't rich, but we had our house, we had our routines, and we had each other. When she was gone, the house got very quiet. My son, Aaron, called me about 6 weeks after the funeral. He said he and his wife, Tiffany, had been talking. They had the extra bedroom, the one they'd been using as a home office, and they thought it made more sense for me to be close to family than to rattle around alone in a 4-bedroom house in Columbus. He made it sound like a gift. He used phrases like peace of mind and we'd love to have you, and it just makes sense, Dad. I want to be honest. Part of me was relieved. Grief does something strange to a person. It makes an empty house feel like it's pressing in on you from every wall. I missed Beverly every single morning when I woke up and the other side of the bed was cold and flat and undisturbed. I missed her coffee cup on the counter. I missed the sound of her moving around in the kitchen before I got up. So I said yes. I sold the house, put most of the furniture in storage, kept what I needed, and moved into the spare bedroom of Aaron and Tiffany's place in Westerville. It was a nice house. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, newer construction in a neighborhood with sidewalks and a community pool. The kind of neighborhood where everyone parks in the garage and waves at each other from a distance. The spare bedroom was at the end of the hall, right next to the laundry room. I noticed that detail the first week, but I didn't think much of it. The first few weeks went fine. I helped where I could, took out the trash before Aaron remembered to, loaded the dishwasher after dinner, carried in groceries when Tiffany came home from the store. I wanted to contribute. I'd spent my whole career teaching teenagers how to show up and be useful, and I wasn't about to sit in a recliner and watch cable for the rest of my life. I had energy. I wanted to do something with it. Tiffany had a way of noticing what I did without quite saying thank you. She'd walk past the clean counter and say, "Oh, good," the way you'd talk to someone who had finally learned where the silverware went. I tried not to read too much into it. She was busy. She worked in pharmaceutical sales and kept long hours. Aaron was in logistics management and traveled a fair amount. They had a full life. I was the new variable, but I noticed things. The first time Tiffany asked me to watch their dog Chester while they went to dinner with friends, I said sure. Chester was a 6-year-old beagle, mostly calm, easy enough. They were gone about 3 hours. When they came home, Tiffany said, "That's such a help, we can go out more now." Not thank you for staying in. Just a quiet statement about what this new arrangement made possible for them. I thought, okay, that's fine, I'm family. The second time it happened, they were gone for 5 hours and had mentioned it to me that morning the way you'd put a note on a calendar. Not a question, a statement. "We're going to the Mitchells on Friday. Chester needs to be walked at 6. I walked Chester at 6. I also ended up making myself dinner from whatever was in the fridge, because they hadn't thought to mention what I should eat while they were out. I want to say I raised this. I want to say I sat my son down and told him what I was noticing. But I didn't. I know exactly why. When Beverly was alive, she was the one who said the hard things in our family. She had a calm, direct way of addressing something uncomfortable that I always admired and never quite managed to learn. Without her, I found myself doing what I'd sometimes done in the classroom when a situation was borderline. Watching, waiting, giving it time, hoping things would self-correct. They didn't self-correct. By November, I had become, without anyone ever saying so directly, the household's de facto caretaker. I watched Chester. I signed for packages. I took Aaron's car in for an oil change because he mentioned it twice in passing and clearly wasn't going to do it himself. I drove Tiffany's mother to a doctor's appointment one Tuesday because Tiffany had a meeting she couldn't move. And I was just home anyway. I was just home anyway. That phrase started appearing regularly. Could you run to the store? You're just home anyway. Could you wait for the plumber? You're just home anyway. Could you take this to the post office, since you're not doing anything? I was 61 years old. I had spent 3 decades shaping young people's understanding of history. I had coached JV baseball for 11 years. I had served on the city school board for 2 terms. I had a pension, a savings account, and a social circle that had admittedly gotten quieter since Beverly, but still existed. I was not nothing. But somewhere in those first few months, I had made myself small. I had confused being needed with being wanted. Those are 2 very different things, and I should have known better. I'd seen that exact confusion play out in my students for years. The kid who did everyone's homework, hoping it would turn into friendship. The one who laughed at every joke, hoping it would turn into belonging. I'd counseled them through it. I'd never thought I'd be living it myself at 61. The dinner party was in late November. Aaron and Tiffany were hosting Thanksgiving. Not just immediate family. They'd invited 8 people, including Tiffany's sister and brother-in-law, a couple from the neighborhood named the Donovans, and 2 of Aaron's college friends who were passing through town. I found out about the scope of this gathering about a week before, when Tiffany handed me a printed list. Not asked me, handed me a list. It had turkey, sides, 2 pies, a vegetable tray, dinner rolls from scratch, timings included, oven temperatures. A note at the bottom that said, "Let me know if you need anything from the store," as though I were a contractor she was briefing. I stood there holding that piece of paper, and I thought, when did I agree to this? I didn't say that. I said, "I'll take a look." She said, "Aaron says you used to do the whole holiday spread. He said your wife taught you." She smiled when she said it. The smile was warm, and I think she believed it was a compliment. Beverly did teach me. We'd spent our first Thanksgiving together burning a turkey in a studio apartment in Cincinnati, laughing until we cried, ordering Chinese food at 9 o'clock at night. By our 10th year together, we had it down to a science. She handled the turkey and the pies. I did the sides. We did it together. That was the point. I cooked Thanksgiving for 12 people. The turkey came out right. The mashed potatoes were good. I used Beverly's method, heavy cream and a lot of butter, and you don't apologize for either. Tiffany's sister said it was the best green bean casserole she'd ever had. Aaron's friend from college shook my hand and told me I should open a restaurant. I ate in the kitchen, not because anyone told me to, because by the time everything was plated and the table was set, and the wine was poured and everyone was seated, there wasn't a chair for me at the table. Tiffany had set it for 12. She had invited 12 people. She had not counted me. I made myself a plate and sat at the kitchen counter and ate alone while the sound of conversation and laughter came through the pass-through. My son walked in once, midway through the meal, to refill a bread basket. He saw me sitting there. He looked at me for a moment and then he said, "Hey Dad, you doing okay?" The way you'd say it to someone who had chosen to sit in the kitchen. The way you'd say it if it were their preference. "I'm fine," I said. "Go be with your guests." He went. I finished my meal. I washed my dishes. I put the leftover turkey in containers and labeled them with tape and a marker the way Beverly used to, the date and the contents, and I put them in the fridge. Then I went to my room and read until I fell asleep. That night, lying in the dark, I thought about the list Tiffany had handed me. I thought about the phrase, "just home anyway." I thought about Chester and the oil change and Tiffany's mother's appointment. I thought about the bedroom that was beside the laundry room. I thought about my son's eyes aimed at the floor when Tiffany talked. I thought, this is who I've become here. And I did this. I let it happen one small thing at a time. The moment I decided to leave didn't come from a dramatic scene. There wasn't a fight. There wasn't a final straw I can point to and say, there, that was it. It was more like something finished draining. A tank I'd been running on empty for months finally registered 0, and I felt very calmly that I was done. The week after Thanksgiving, I called my friend Roger. Roger and I had taught at the same high school for 17 years. His wife, Sandra, and Beverly had been close. We'd had dinner together dozens of times over the years, and Roger was one of the few people who'd called me regularly after Beverly passed, not to say the right thing, but just to check in. He lived in a condo complex in Gahana with a pretty good gym and a quiet courtyard. He'd mentioned more than once that units came available there from time to time. I told him I was looking. He made a call. 2 days later, I had a tour scheduled. The unit was on the 2nd floor, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, an open living area, a small balcony that looked out over a parking lot but got good morning light. The rent was $1,140 a month. For a retired teacher with a pension and a cushion from the house sale, it was manageable. I put down a deposit that afternoon. I didn't tell Aaron and Tiffany right away. I want to be careful here about how I describe this, because I don't want it to sound like I was being sneaky. I wasn't plotting anything. I wasn't waiting for the right dramatic moment to announce my departure. I simply wanted to have it settled before I said anything, because I knew what would happen when I did. There would be a conversation. Tiffany would be measured and polite and slightly wounded in the way that suggests she considers herself the injured party. Aaron would stand in doorways. Things would be said. I wanted to have somewhere solid to go before that happened. I picked a moving date. The second Saturday of December. The week before I left, something happened that I've thought about many times since. It was small. That's the thing about the moments that actually clarify something. They're never the ones you expect. I came out of my room on a Tuesday morning to find a laundry basket sitting in the hallway directly in front of my door. Aaron's laundry, unwashed, left there the same way you'd leave a bag outside a hotel room. I stood there looking at it for a while. I thought, he left this here because he knows I'll do it, not because he asked, not because we agreed, because the pattern has been established, and I've never once broken it, and so the expectation has become invisible. It's no longer a request, it's an assumption. I stepped over the basket. I went to the kitchen, made my coffee, sat with it for a while. That basket sat in the hallway all day. I walked past it 4 or 5 times. I didn't touch it. By the time Aaron got home from work, the basket was still there. He walked past it, looked at me with a slightly puzzled expression, didn't say anything. The basket was still there the next morning when I got up. I want to tell you that he eventually did his own laundry, and that was the end of it. What actually happened is that Tiffany did it on Wednesday evening, without comment, the way you'd correct a small administrative error. As if the problem wasn't the expectation, just the outcome. I finished packing that same week. I didn't have much. A suitcase, a few boxes of books, Beverly's photograph from the nightstand, the coffee maker I'd bought when I moved in, because I have particular opinions about coffee. And theirs was a single-serve pod situation I could not make peace with. I arranged for Roger and his son to help me move on Saturday morning. They'd be there at 9. I told Aaron and Tiffany on Friday evening. We were in the kitchen. I said simply that I'd rented a place in Gahana and I'd be moving out tomorrow. There was a silence, then Tiffany said, "Tomorrow? You're leaving tomorrow?" 9 o'clock, I said. She looked at Aaron. He looked at me. He said, "Dad, why didn't you?" "We could have talked about this." "We can talk about it now," I said. "But my deposit is already down and the moving help is already arranged. I found a nice unit. I think it's a good situation for everyone." "We don't want you to feel like you have to leave," Tiffany said. Her voice had shifted into a register I recognized. The careful tone people use when they're worried about how something will look. "I don't feel like I have to," I said. "I want to. I think I'll be better set up with my own space." Aaron said, "Who's going to?" And then he stopped. He stopped because he heard himself. I watched it happen in real time. The sentence he'd started was going to end with something like, "Watch Chester," or "Be here when deliveries come," or something else that would have told us both exactly what my role in that house had been. He heard where the sentence was going and he stopped it. I said, "Good night," and I went to my room. Roger and his son were there at 9 sharp the next morning, a gray December Saturday, cold and flat and smelling like snow that hadn't committed yet. We had everything loaded in under 2 hours. My room, once I'd cleared it out, looked the same as it must have looked before I moved in. A spare room next to the laundry, pleasant enough, functional, nobody's idea of a home. I shook Aaron's hand at the door. He looked like he wanted to say something and hadn't found it yet. Tiffany stood behind him with her arms crossed and her lips pressed together in a way that could have been hurt or could have been irritation. I honestly didn't know which, and I realized, standing there, that I'd spent months trying to interpret her expressions, and today I was done doing that. "Take care of yourselves," I said. I meant it. I followed Roger's truck to Gahana. My new apartment was quiet in a way that felt entirely different from the quiet of Aaron and Tiffany's house. That house had been quiet in the way that reminds you of what's not being said. This apartment was quiet the way a blank page is quiet, open. I set Beverly's photograph on the shelf above the small TV. I put my books on the shelves in the order I liked them. I made coffee in my own coffee maker and stood on my little balcony in the cold with a mug and looked at the parking lot and the gray December sky, and I felt for the first time in months like I was standing on solid ground. Roger came over that first evening with Sandra's chili. She insisted, said I needed a proper first night meal, and she was right. and the three of us sat at my little table and talked for 2 hours. I hadn't laughed that freely in months. I kept noticing the feeling, the way you notice the absence of a noise that had been constant for so long you'd stopped hearing it. The tension I'd been carrying, the low-grade vigilance of someone who's always half waiting for the next thing to be asked of them. It was draining out of me. Slowly, but measurably. I slept well that first night. I couldn't remember the last time I'd done that. Christmas came and went. I spent it with Roger and Sandra and their daughter's family, which is the kind of chaotic, warm, sprawling family meal where someone knocks over a glass of wine and the kids disappear under the table and the dog gets into something in the kitchen. I helped Sandra with the sides. She thanked me specifically by name, with eye contact like one adult to another. That sounds like a small thing, I promise you it wasn't. Aaron texted me on Christmas morning, "Merry Christmas, Dad. Hope you're doing okay." Short. Tidy. I sent back the same. It had the feeling of two people being careful around something fragile. The missed calls started on a Thursday night in January, about 5 weeks after I moved out. 31 of them, over 2 days. Aaron, Tiffany. Aaron again. My phone buzzed, and I watched the screen light up from across the room, the way you'd watch weather coming in from a distance. I let them go. Not out of anger. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't performing silence for effect. I simply wasn't ready to re-enter that dynamic without knowing why they were calling. And I'd learned over the previous months that going toward things unprepared was how I'd ended up in that situation in the first place. On the second day, Aaron left a voicemail. His voice sounded tight. He said that Tiffany's company had cut her territory, and she'd taken a significant pay reduction. He said the finances were tighter than they'd expected. He said Chester had been having some health issues. Nothing critical, but vet appointments, medications, monitoring. He said they missed having me around. He said, "Things are harder than we thought they'd be, Dad." I sat with the voicemail for a while. I thought about the spare bedroom next to the laundry. I thought about the printed list for Thanksgiving. I thought about the sentence Aaron had stopped himself from finishing, the one that would have ended with "Watch Chester" or something like it. I thought about standing at the kitchen counter eating alone, while 12 people talked and laughed on the other side of the wall. I thought about what he hadn't said on that voicemail. He hadn't said, "We handled this wrong." He hadn't said, "I watched you eat Thanksgiving alone and I went back to the table anyway." He hadn't said, "I left my laundry outside your room like you were hired help, and I knew exactly what I was doing." He said things are harder than we thought. I called him back the next morning, after my coffee, when my thinking was clear. He picked up on the second ring. I told him I was glad I'd called. I told him I was sorry the finances were tight, and I hoped they could work through it. I told him I was glad Chester's situation wasn't too serious, and I hoped the treatment was working. I said all of that, and I meant it, because regardless of everything else, he is my son, and I don't stop caring about his life because I've moved across town. Then I said, "I'm happy to have you over for dinner sometime. I'm not far." There was a pause. He said, "Yeah, that would be good." He didn't ask me to come back. I think he knew better than to ask, or maybe he knew the answer. Maybe he'd done some of the thinking I'd hoped he'd do when I left. Maybe he hadn't. I don't know what happens in a marriage when the door closes. I only know what I saw from the outside. I am 61 years old. I get up most mornings before the sun comes up, the same way I always have. I make my coffee. I stand on my balcony, even in the cold. I have a decent jacket, and I don't mind the cold. I've been going to the gym in Rogers Building 3 times a week. I joined a history lecture series at the library on Wednesday evenings. I have coffee with Roger and Sandra on Sunday mornings at a diner near their place that does eggs the right way. Over medium, not overcooked. With a toast that actually has some color on it. I cook when I want to. I don't cook when I don't want to. No one hands me lists. Beverly's photograph is on the shelf. Some mornings I say good morning to her. I don't think that's strange. I think that's what you do when you've loved someone for 40 years and the world keeps going without them. You talk to the photograph. You find your way. I want to say this clearly, because I think it matters. I am not angry at my son. I'm not angry at Tiffany. Anger is a fire that needs feeding, and I made a decision some time ago that I wasn't going to spend whatever good years I have left feeding fires. What happened in that house happened because no one drew a line, including me. I should have spoken up sooner. I should have said, "I'm happy to help, and here's what that means, and here's what it doesn't." I know that, but I also know that there is a difference between helping family and being absorbed by them. A difference between being present and being invisible. A difference between love and convenience. I learned something in that house that I should have remembered from 30 years of teaching. When you let people treat you a certain way long enough, they stop noticing that there was ever another way. The behavior stops being a choice and becomes a fact like the weather. You stop being a person and become a feature of the landscape. The day I drove away from that house in December, I didn't feel like I had won anything. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt like myself again. Like I had taken up the shape I was supposed to take up after months of compressing into something smaller. I still take up space. I plan to keep doing that. Aaron came over for dinner on a Saturday in February. Just him. Tiffany had plans with her sister. I made beef stew and cornbread. We sat at my little table and ate and talked more honestly than we had in a long time. He said he'd been thinking. He didn't get specific about what, and I didn't push. Some things unspool at their own pace. He helped me with the dishes after. Side by side at the sink, the way we used to do when he was 12, and I was the kind of tired that came from a full day and a full life. He washed, I dried. Neither of us said much. At the door leaving, he hugged me in that way men sometimes do. Brief and firm and carrying more than it says. I hugged him back the same way. Good stew, Dad, he said. Beverly's recipe, I said. He nodded. He went to his car. I watched him pull out of the parking lot, and then I closed the door, and I went and stood on the balcony in the cold with the last of my coffee, and I looked out at the flat February night, and I stayed there a while, just breathing. You don't have to win. You just have to know when it's time to go. And then you have to go, even when part of you wants to stay, especially then.